Hello, this is our presentation about X-ray emission. Before we begin, we'd like to have a first look at our outline for the project. We will begin with the introduction to the history and discovery of the X-rays. From then, we will dive right into our topic, which concerns the quantity and quality of X-rays. Other factors affecting both of the measurements will also be mentioned. For the last part, an important factor called filtration will be presented. The introduction of X-ray into our world was made possible by a German physicist, Wilhelm Conrad Röntgen. The discovery of X-ray was described as purely an accident, and here is how it unfolded. During an experiment with a cathode tube, Wilhelm made a glass container in which a beam of electrons lights up a fluorescent window. He had wrapped cardboard around the tube to keep the fluorescent light from escaping, when something peculiar happened. Another screen outside the tube was glowing. In other words, invisible rays had passed through the cardboard. Wilhelm had no idea what those rays were, so he called them X-rays. From then on, multiple experiments were performed by Wilhelm. One of which is his wife's hand, his first medical X-ray. With this amazing discovery, hospitals around the world immediately attempt to jump right into performing diagnostics using X-ray. With the introduction complete, we will now start getting into the technical part of X-ray. Specifically, X-ray quantity. By the definition, the output intensity is measured in R or mR and termed X-ray quantity. However, we can simply understand X-ray quantity is equal to the number of photons produced during an exposure. Before focusing on the quantity of X-ray, we should have an overview of the difference between X-ray quantity and X-ray quality. As we can see, while X-ray quality is defined as the distribution of X-rays photons, X-ray quantity is the number of photons themselves. In the meanwhile, factors affecting X-ray quantity and quality doesn't have many difference other than that of the unit called milliamperage. The effects of X-rays Schwann-Leidy are usually called penetration, while on the other hand, X-rays quantity is termed as output intensity. So how do we estimate the X-ray intensity? We will do this by evaluating other factors such as kilovoltage and filtration from a nomogram. With the definition of the X-ray quantity have been cleared, we will now look into the four factors that affects the measurement, which includes milliamperage by seconds, kilovoltages, distance and filtration. The first factor is milliamperage. A change in Ma or mass results in a proportional change in the amplitude of the X-ray emission spectrum at all energies. It means if we double the mass, the number of electrons striking the target is doubled. In addition to milliamperage, kilovoltage or kVp is another factor which affects the value of X-ray quantity greatly. The change in quantity is proportional to the square of the ratio of the change by this formula. It means if the kVp is doubled, the intensity would increase by a factor of 4. This figure demonstrates a schematic of two X-ray spectrum, one at a lower energy of 80 kVp, and one at a higher energy of 140 kVp. In each case, the highest possible energy X-ray that can be generated is determined by the kVp. Since there are more X-rays and the average energy of the higher kVp spectrum is higher, this particular spectrum will penetrate thick anatomy better than the low kVp ones. All of this mean that, the higher is the kilovoltages, the higher is the beam quantity. The third notable factor is distance, which is governed by the inverse square law. The inverse square law states that the radiation intensity from an X-ray tube varies inversely with the square of the distance from the target. For example, if the distance between the source and the area of exposure is doubled, the intensity of the beam will be reduced to 25%. The fourth and the final factor affecting X-ray quantity is filtration, whose function is to reduce X-ray beam intensity while increasing the average energy. And with that, we've completed the first half of our presentation. Here below is our summary table of the factors affecting X-ray quantity. Moving on from quantity, our focus will now be on the better measurement of the X-ray quality. By definition, X-ray quality is termed as radiation exposure, which effectively describe the X-ray spectrum, predict X-rays interaction, and often measured with half-value layer. The quality of X-rays usually defined itself as hard or soft. The higher quality of X-rays are, the harder are their beam, and vice versa. Now we will go into an important index of determining X-ray quality, half-value layer. HVL is the width of a material required to reduce the air kerma of an X-ray or gamma ray to half its original value. HVL is also an indirect measure of photon energy or the hardness of a beam. A lower HVL indicates low photon energy. Also, HVL is usually measured in millimeters of aluminum. So how do we calculate half-value layer? The equation you are looking at is derived from the intensity equation, which calculate the intensity of the beam at distance x, cm, within a material. Where Ix is the intensity at depth of x cm, I0 is the original intensity, and is the linear attenuation coefficient. Referring to factors affecting X-ray quality, we have kilovoltage and filtration. For kilovoltage, the higher is kVp, so is the beam quality and the half-value layer, which also mean you can get a better quality X-ray. Talking about filtration mean you want to filter noise. The primary purpose of adding filtration to the X-ray beam is to remove low-energy X-rays that have no chance of getting to the film. As filtration is increased, so is the beam quality, but quantity is decreased. Similar to quantity, we have also made a summary table for the factors affecting X-ray quality, however, in which we can see X-ray quality is not affected by mass and distance, unlike quantity. For our last part of our presentation, different types of filtration will be discussed. Filtrations in X-ray machine consist of three main types, including inherent filtration, added filtration, and compensating filtration. Inherent filtration refers to a permanently implemented filter in the useful beam. It also includes the window of the X-ray tube and any permanent enclosure for the tube or source, as we can see from the previous picture. In diagnostic X-ray tubes, the glass is equal to about 0.5 mm L. For added filtration, it usually just mean any filtration which is in addition to the inherent filtration. However, added filtration is always a must for any X-ray machine to function optimally. It is usually made of aluminum and placed on the mirror of the collimator. Added filtration functions as a filter which attenuates X-rays of all energies emitted from the tube, which results in a beam with higher effective energy, greater penetrability, higher quality, and an increased half-value layer. As for compensating filtration, they are external, uniquely shaped and typically aluminum mounts often affixed to the collimator of the X-ray tube. The filters are used to limit the primary beam at an anatomical region during a specific examination that requires fine radiographic detail at both the denser and the less dense regions. They usually come in many types, three of which are boomerang filters, trough filters, and wedge filters. Firstly, wedge filter is a wedge-shaped filter affixed to the collimator of the X-ray tube, in which the thicker portion of the wedge is placed in the primary beam, which passes through the less dense parts of the anatomy being imaged. Secondly, trough filter is a channel-shaped filter used during chest radiographs. It is also affixed to the collimator of the X-ray tube, with the thicker outer regions of the trough corresponding to the less dense aspects of the peripheral lungs. Different from the above-mentioned filters, boomerang filter is shaped like the indigenous Australian boomerang, which is traditionally used during shoulder examination. It is placed behind the patient, with the thickest portion of the superior lateral aspect of the shoulder. With this, boomerang filtration balances out the density of the soft tissue often during the shoulder examination. That's it for our presentation. Thank you for listening.